Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Fusco. I will be your host for today, and I'm really excited for today's session. It's our fourth virtual real estate event for Ontario Realtors, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Really pleased with the response we've received in the registrations. It's our highest registration to date for this event. And I'm really excited today. We're going to do things a little bit differently. Joining us today, I've got our president and fearless leader at MPAC, Nicole McNeill, as well as Jennifer Pearce, the president of the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board. And they will be having a live fireside chat brought to us from Pickering, Ontario, where our head office is. And I'm also glad to have Shaun Cathcart back. He's the senior economist from the Canadian Real Estate Association. And my good friend Jason Mercer, who I've worked with for many years. He's the Chief Market Analyst and Director of Services at the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board. So let's get started. There's going to be a lot of great information, and I'm going to hand it over to the two presidents. Welcome, Nicole and Jennifer.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And you're right, this is our fourth time doing it, but the first time doing it in person. So I think we've always been on different screens, but Chris, you're in a different room. And Jennifer, welcome. And thank you for joining me here today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us virtually for this event. I'm so happy you're here. And we have an opportunity to do something a little bit different for this event this year. So I'm really looking forward to this fireside chat all week.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Nicole. I'm so excited to be here too.
So today's event illustrates the importance of nurturing partnerships. It demonstrates how collaboration can thrive and valuable insights can emerge when industry stakeholders such as us unite. So speaking of coming together, I understand TRREB just hosted your largest realtor quest back in May, and I heard your team had a great turnout, so congratulations.
Thank you. We had over 11,000 real estate professionals from across the globe setting a new attendance record, in addition to some amazing thought leaders on stage as well. It's truly a team effort, and I'm really proud of what we've accomplished together.
That's great. Were there any emerging trends or larger themes you heard from realtors over the course of that event?
Well, what excites me the most about this event is how well it spotlights industry innovation. Looking forward, it's clear that topics such as urban revitalization, affordable housing, and community-centered development are important themes emerging here in Ontario.
Jennifer, I completely agree. Affordable housing specifically is unquestionably a prevailing concern dominating discussions at the moment. And some of our recent data insights revealed that communities with homes that are under 500,000 have become so scarce across Ontario over the last 10 years.
I believe it. Supply and demand, mortgage rates, construction and labor costs, and inflation all contribute to what we're seeing unfold in the housing market. Can you tell me a little bit more about your data insights?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, today we're estimating that 41% of detached homes across the province are worth more than $1 million. 10 years ago, the number of homes available at that price point, believe it or not, was 6%.
So what I'm hearing is that half the single family homes in Ontario are worth upwards of $1 million. That is staggering. What else have you noticed?
Well, overall, 74% of residential properties in Ontario had a home estimate of less than $500,000 10 years ago. Today, that number is less than 19%.
Well, you've already told us a bit about what this means for single family homes, but what about condos and townhomes?
Well, keeping on the 10-year to current year theme, 10 years ago, residential condominiums, particularly in the GTHA, had an average value of roughly $325,000. Today, that value has exceeded $650,000.
So the cost of condos in the GTHA has practically doubled.
Yes, and when it comes to townhomes, only 4% are less than $500,000. So buyers who want to enter the market at a price point under $500,000 might need to look beyond the GTHA. So for example, cities like Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, North Bay, Thunder Bay, Windsor, and even in cities like Ottawa, London, Kitchener, Kingston, Barrie, Peterborough, a prospective buyer, they're going to need almost $750,000.
Well, this kind of data is certainly valuable to realtors as it helps us identify trends and inform our clients. It also shows how quickly the property landscape can change.
So Jennifer, I'm curious, from your perspective, has there been an increase in appetite from realtors for this kind of data over the last few years?
I've recently heard the data is the new oil or gold, and I think this is true, especially for realtors. When it comes to listing properties, you have to have access to public record data, such as assessment and land registry data, which is crucial. And Armed with this information, realtors can advise and negotiate confidently on behalf of their clients, ensuring they get the best possible deal. As realtors, it's our responsibility to guide buyers and sellers through the process of buying and selling, and we want to ensure they get the best value for their investment. Property valuations help. TRREB and MPAC have worked together for many years to ensure Ontario realtors have access to information on all properties in Ontario. But with that said, I'm a bit curious to learn a bit more about how MPAC captures the property information that realtors use.
That's a great question, Jennifer. So MPAC obtains data from so many sources, from the Land Registry Office in TerraNet to building permits and plans submitted to us by municipalities. MPAC is constantly processing new property information. We also leverage technology to help cultivate and verify data. We're always improving our processes and developing innovative valuation tools that can help us better understand the unique features of every property in Ontario. So for example, digital imagery, which helps us identify missing structures like pools and decks and other additions. And we're implementing AI and machine learning in ways that can help us gather this type of information more efficiently than ever. But of course, the highest quality information comes directly from our property inspectors who are out in the field regularly. And when we visit a property or speak with property owners, we're looking to answer questions such as, is the total area of your floor space accurate? Does the property have a finished basement? Have there been any recent renovations? And what's interesting though, is I'm not sure if you know this, but there are 5 key factors that determine the majority of a property's value: location, lot dimensions, quality of construction, the age of buildings, and of course, square footage.
Wow, that's a lot of information for your team to maintain. Speaking of property owners, that brings me to my next question, which I'm sure you hear a lot. Any update on a new assessment date from the province?
Well, not yet. However, last fall, the Government of Ontario announced a review of the property assessment and taxation system, and I'm pleased to say that that's underway. MPAC has been engaged and we're contributing our assessment expertise and experience to that review. As part of this process, the province has committed pausing the province-wide reassessment until that review concludes. So what that means for all property owners is assessments for this year in 2024 will continue to be based on 2016 values.
Well, thanks for that update, Nicole. Any guidance or advice on how to respond to property owners who are concerned that their taxes will drastically increase once the assessment resumes?
So this is a question that our teams in valuation and government relations hear fairly frequently. And the truth is, if your property value goes up, it doesn't necessarily mean that your property taxes will increase. And that's a very important point. It depends on all factors, such as how much your property value has changed and how your municipality adjusts your tax rates. So when we do a reassessment, we're updating our values to match the current market as of that legislated valuation date. So let me break it down. For example, if you determine that your home value has increased by 20% since the last reassessment, it's most likely that homes in your municipality also did too. So in this scenario, your municipality could reduce its tax rate and stabilize the tax base, and property taxes would remain the same. So realtors and property owners must understand that a reassessment isn't about generating more income for municipalities. It's about making sure that everyone pays their fair share of property taxes based on property value.
So what's a realistic example of property taxes going up?
Well, if an owner carried out extensive renovations that drove their property value higher than the average home in their neighborhood, and the property value increased at a much faster rate than the rest of the homes in that neighborhood, that property owner might see a change in their property taxes.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying, Nicole. It's certainly helpful. Now I'd like to come back to something you said earlier. You mentioned MPAC is developing innovative valuation tools and integrating AI and machine learning into your processes. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I would love to. I'm very passionate about this. With the real estate landscape constantly changing, I believe technology can help us make more accurate projections and stay ahead of these market fluctuations. The future of property valuation lies in a seamless integration of technology and human expertise. We can demonstrate the value of accurate property valuation by harnessing the power of AI and data analytics while still providing that personalized insights and guidance. So MPAC has been using machine learning for the last 20 years to generate real-time values, and we offer that through a tool I'm sure you're well familiar with, our automated valuation model. And we're committed to staying ahead of the curve with the latest technological innovations as we continue to revolutionize the valuation process and generate real-time and predictive analytics.
Well, I agree, Nicole. Machine learning has truly begun to transform the landscape of real estate valuation. As I know from my work with TRREB and REMAX, the AVM is a great tool that helps inform both pricing and risk mitigation. Certainly two key data points that all of us in the industry are closely watching as we work with our clients.
And we are always happy to hear how our data can help support the real estate sector. In fact, I believe Chris Fusco has a special AVM offer for our attendees today, but I'll let him speak to that shortly.
I can't wait to hear it. Speaking of support, are there any other resources MPAC has available to realtors?
Yes, I'm excited to share that we recently published a real estate toolkit on our website, mpac.ca. This resource helps agents understand how they can leverage MPAC data. It also equips them with guided language, FAQs, and ready-to-post social content that can help agents facilitate this conversation about property assessment and taxation directly with property owners and your clients.
Wow, that sounds great, Nicole. I'll be sure to check those out.
Well, Chris and the team will share the link with everyone here today, as I mentioned. And speaking of Chris, it's just about time to turn things back over to him. But before we say goodbye, I'd like to thank you one more time, Jen, for being here. This chat has been so great.
It was my pleasure, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And you're welcome anytime to come here. It's been great seeing you again in person. And Chris, if you're still there, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Nicole and Jennifer. That was fantastic. And thank you to our AV team. So we bought a lot of this equipment prior to the pandemic, and this is the first time we've had a chance to use it. So great job, everyone. So Nicole mentioned we're going to have an offer for the realtors who are attending. The team has not given me the free code for our AVM comparable report because they know me too well and they know me that I would tell everyone. So you're gonna have to fill out the survey to receive this $45 value code. So at the end of it, you're gonna receive a survey question. Please fill it out and you will get your AVM code at the end. So let's keep the information flowing, and I'm very pleased to introduce Shaun Cathcart from CREA. He's been doing this with us from the beginning, and he's going to give us a Canadian and a national overview of what the market's been doing. So, Shaun, over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me back again for another year. I guess I'll share my screen here and get right into my slideshow. It's a little bit conflicted coming into this because, obviously we're at a turning point with rates now going down. That's what everyone's been waiting for. This market's been basically asleep or in hibernation for a couple of years, and that's over. But that rate cut was 22 days ago, and there's not a lot of data that I can show you to say here's what's actually going on right now. So what I thought I'd do is say here's where the starting point is. We can assume it's not a bold call to say that things are going to start to improve. We don't have any data on that yet, but what is the starting point? And I thought for fun, I just added this in half an hour ago. I knew that we were going to be talking about home prices in Ontario, and this is a reference that I've always wanted to put in a slideshow about that. $1 million is exactly a lot of money these days. That's sort of, I remember when I was a millionaire for a brief period at January and February of 2022. And maybe we'll be again at some point. But now, one of the things I always like to start with, and I can't help myself, even though I only have 15 minutes, is demographic aging, the secular demographic aging of all of the people that popped out of nowhere after World War II, the hockey stick of population globally that went from 2.5 billion people to like 7 in the space of 75 years. They're all still around, and they're just sort of aging through time. So you've got your typical homeownership space, not a lot of people in that space 50 years ago, lots of kids. So you didn't really need a lot more housing. You just had to have maybe bunk beds, or you just shoved them in the basement, or you stuck them where you could back in those days. And that was the baby boomers, when half the population of Canada was under 30. But if you animate that through time, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2012, and recently, you can see how you can call them millennials, Gen Xers, and boomers, but really they're all part of one giant hump of population, giant sort of cohort of population that has never existed before and now does. And it popped up starting 75 years ago, and now it's all middle-aged. And so that space that requires people to sort of have a place of their own is increasingly filled up. And you know, the inflow is at record levels. The outflow is still very low. That's silent generation folks born during World War II and the Great Depression, so not a lot of them. And you know, if you're waiting for a big divestment of big single-family homes to the next generation, all those, you know, bedrooms that are sort of time capsules of the 1990s with Nintendo 64s and PlayStation 1s gathering dust, you're going to be waiting another, you know, 10 or 20 years. Now you'll notice that this chart only goes to 2022. This is my deck from last year. I do have the 2023 version that I'm going to show you right now, and it's amazing in the space of 1 year how much some of these sticks rose up with population growth. So I'll show you that right now. Whoop. And you'll see the biggest group by far is the 25 to 35, the first-time home buyers, the people that are frustrated, the people whose home ownership rate has gone from 60 to 50% in the space of 10 years. They're not happy about it, and but their ranks are growing, and they will continue to grow. So that's population and demographics. Why did that rise up so much from 2022 to 2023? Because population growth was very strong last year. How strong? We talked about it. I really think that you need to see it. So I'm going to show it to you right now. I call it my gasp chart. I've showed this to rooms of 400, 500, 600 people and gotten a giant gasp from the entire room. So I'm going to show you right now Canada's population growth year over year, changing the number of people from World War II to last year. Are you ready? Boom. So that is what's known as a hockey stick chart. That's pop growth, extremely strong. I think, you know, we talk about our immigration targets in Canada. That's the new high immigration target right there. So I think what a lot of people were asking in the last year is, what the heck is that? And, you know, 750,000 people over and above the 500,000 immigration target. I'm not here to make a political, I'm not a political person, but everyone's got to live somewhere, and we had a housing crisis before this happened. So you can, you know, if you want to think about how many people are out there on the sidelines of the housing market or like clamoring for a roof over their head in this country, that's all just in the last year, with the most recent quarter being the most extreme of all time. You know, just in October, November, December of 2023, there was more people added to our population than almost every year since World War II. So what are we building for these people to live in? Because it's not actually a problem. It's actually, Canada's actually the one country in the world that's trying to deactivate this population bomb with immigration. But you need to, you know, have services and infrastructure to accommodate that. One of those things is housing. So what are we building? This is housing unit completions in Canada, broken out by type. One of the things you'll notice is that compared to 20 years ago, say when we had a housing boom, built a lot of single family homes and stuff that you can raise a family in. These days, it's mostly apartments. And they're not big apartments. This is not Sweden. This is not Brooklyn. 3-bedroom apartments that you can raise a family in. These are little tiny shoebox type things. A lot of money exchanged between developers who want to put as many units as possible in the building, and investors who pay by the square foot and don't have to live in it. And another interesting factor relating to the apartment piece is that 38% of those at this point are purpose-built rentals. So there's been a lot of attention around encouraging more rental building. But, you know, if anything, in the last decade, that's the only category of new completions of units that is blowing up the way we want all of them to be. So we talk about how many units we're building, but, you know, it's not the same amount of housing, and it's not the same type or tenure of housing. And so you got all these young people that still want to own a sort of ground level home that they can sort of, that's big enough to raise a family in, and you know, stuff that you can own and pay off, and you know, and have a mortgage burning party and then live rent free, and build that nest egg and have that security and put down those roots, falling for 20 years. If you want to fit more than 2 people in it, well, that's about a third at this point, including the missing middle, which is just as missing as ever. So that's your orange, yellow, and green on this chart, semis, rows, you know, not nearly enough of those, and 20 years of basically cut in half construction of single family homes. Okay, so what happens when that happens and you've got the demand that we have? Well, the existing home market gets bought up. So this is the Canada end of month residential active listings on all MLS systems in Canada. And you can see, well, we've got a trend here. This is 20 years over, up, and all the way down. It looks like it's up these days from COVID, and obviously that was a ridiculously low point. I think we're about as high as we're going to go right now. We're still 40% below where we were 10 years ago, despite a record population growth, record housing stock growth. That the number of these things that is actually for sale at any given point in time is 40% below where it was 10 years ago, and it's I think going to start to go down again fairly soon. Now, if you look at the number of months of inventory, again, you know, from a buyer's market 10 years ago to a seller's market now, we're a little bit above that rate now, but you know, that's not going to last. If you think about the starting point for things to start to really pick up again in the second half of this year, which I think they will, as rates go down, you know, we're all this housing crisis, supply crisis didn't go away. It's just been on pause, and we're about to hit the play button. Okay, so if you break that out across the country, where are all of these different provinces starting off this new phase of higher activity? That, you know, it's not a bold call to say like that's definitely going to happen as rates go down. So here's the number of months of inventory across the country. You can see it ranges sort of between 2.5% to 6%. If I put these numbers on, this is the long-term average for each of these things. So it really just depends on where you are versus your long-term average. Obviously, Quebec and East, these are places that never had a housing boom until 5 years ago. So their long-term average is very high, so they're below that. Where are we more average? Well, no surprise, BC and Ontario, okay? These are the places that have been hit hardest in the high interest rate environment that we've been in. No surprise, because they're more expensive. If I was to add on where a seller's market would be, that would be these red bars. And like, you know, Alberta, it's already a seller's market to start with. Manitoba's close. On the East Coast, very close. PI, not so much, but I think that might be a temporary thing with the capital gains inclusion rate increase. That we did see an increase in listings of rental properties in the last couple of months. Not a lot of them sold, so I think that's probably going to be coming off any day now. So that might be a temporary thing. And if I were to add on where a buyer's market would be, I'd have to scale the chart up to 16 months of inventory. We're not even close. So the bottom line here is that, like, at worst, the coldest of the cold markets, BC and Ontario, in the last 2 years, only got all the way back to Goldilocks, basically middle of the road. And that's about to turn a corner and go back down and get hotter. Meanwhile, everywhere else, still, you know, liquid hot magma, if I can go back to my Austin Powers reference from the beginning. So that's where things are sitting right now. I don't have data to show you that things are going to pick up, but I think they definitely will. Prices, you know, holding firm. Again, on pause, just waiting for rates to go down a little bit more and more people to come back into the market. So the question is, what are interest rates going to do? And so let's think about the Canadian economy. This is Canadian real GDP, sort of flat as a pancake for the last couple of years. We've patted ourselves on the back a couple of times for narrowly avoiding a recession by like 1/10 of a percentage point, which is not something to write home about. But the only reason we've been able to do that is because we've been shoveling hundreds of thousands of more people into the economy to prop it up. If you look at real GDP per capita, it looks like this, which is horrible. That is a recession. That is as bad as it was during the financial crisis. If you look historically, there's only twice in history that it's ever plunged off a cliff like this. One was after the financial crisis, the other time is right now. So I think back to 2018 when we had a technical recession that didn't feel like one. This is not a technical recession that really feels like one for a lot of people. And certainly I've seen very prominent Bay Street economists on BNN saying, why do we have restrictive monetary policy at all if our economy looks like this? The other big thing to think about is mortgage renewals. And this is a chart from the most recent Bank of Canada Financial Stability Report, formerly known as the Financial System Review. They renamed it and kept the same acronym, which is pretty clever. And you can see this is the median increase in mortgage payments upon renewal compared to origination. So you can see in 2025 and 2026, that's coming up next year, especially the green bars, which are the variable rate mortgages with fixed payments, where they've gone to interest only and the amortizations have gone out to infinity, that are all going to reset. Median increases in payments of 50% next year, 60% next year. And I was at a conference recently with a big wig from the Bank of Canada was there, and this chart actually got the most questions. And one of the things about meeting with Bank of Canada people is that they're very good at keeping on script, but oftentimes they'll just go off a little bit and you get that nugget of gold. And the one thing that he said about this chart was, well, remember, this is just a median. And then he said, I've seen the distribution. So it reminded me of that old George Carlin joke. Consider the intelligence of the average American, and then consider that half of everyone is below that. This is the same sort of thing. This is the median. So consider a 60% payment increase in your mortgage payment, and then consider that half of everyone is above that. It's a scary proposition, and a reason that rates might have to come down faster in Canada. So here's your, average 5-year fixed, average 5-year variable, discounted mortgage rate. Here's where people originated a lot of those sort of worrisome ones, between 1% and 2%, which is a great rate until you have to renew it, and the highest prices of all time, also the highest sales volumes of all time. And here's where those things renew. And so if we don't get back down to a couple hundred basis points lower than we are right now, we're going to be in big trouble. And so that's going to be something for the central bank to consider. I'm going to finish off here with an interest rate forecast. This is the Bank of Canada's policy rate that they announce every 8 times a year. You can see that that's the big cut that happened in June, on June 5th. But still got a long way to go to get back to anywhere near neutral or normal. What does that look like currently? Well, that's a forecast from yesterday, less than 24 hours ago. So it's the most recent forecast that's likely to be wrong. These things change all the time, but this is the best I can do. When do we get back to 3%, which would be 200 basis points below the peak? January 2027. That's really not going to help a lot of people who are renewing mortgages this year, next year, and the year after. But again, this is just a forecast. What does it look like when those mortgages start to renew in the summer of next year? Not low enough. And what does it look like by the end of next year? Well, we had a pretty strong inflation number come in 2 days ago. And so this thing is adjusted up. And now we're only expecting 2 more cuts this year. So a total of 3, which would get us down to 4.25. I personally think this is going to get a lot steeper. But at the moment, markets are thinking that it's not going to be steeper. So just a quick reminder again of this gas chart. The demand's out there, and I'll finish off with this image of a coiled spring. This market is a coiled spring that is ready to explode. It's got a lot of potential energy. I chose an image of a garage door spring, which is sometimes referred to as a widowmaker. They say don't work on these things yourself if you don't know what you're doing, because there's so much potential energy in there, it'll take your head off. And I think that's a good sort of analogy for where the housing market is right now. And so depending on how fast rates come down, there's nowhere for this market to go but up. And in a lot of cases, you know, we're basically already near a seller's market to begin with, at the coldest point we could possibly be in the last sort of 5 or so years. So buckle up. And with that, I will stop my share and hand it back over to either Chris or Jason or whoever's going to take over.
Thank you very much, Shaun. Great presentation as always. And I like your garage door spring analogy. I've never heard that one before. And obviously, I'm a big Austin Powers fan, so anytime you can put Dr. Evil in a slideshow, I'm really impressed. Just a reminder to everyone, I know there's questions coming in. You can put questions in the chat, and then we're going to bring Jason and Shaun back after Jason's presentation, and we'll have a bit of a roundtable. So thanks very much, Shaun. I'd like to bring on Jason Mercer now for his presentation. It's going to be focused on the GTA and Ontario market. Thank you for joining us, Jason. I'm, Jason, for most of us in the GTA, we see him on TV. I've known Jason for a long time, and at Realtor Quest, whenever I'm with them, I'm the cameraman because all these realtors come up and they want to have a picture with Jason. So we're really happy to have him again here. And with that, Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. All right, I'll jump right in. And look, I want to thank you, Chris, and everyone at MPAC again for having me for another year. It's always great to partner up with your association. It's always great to present alongside my colleague, Shaun Cathcart from CREA as well. So again, thanks very much. And thanks to all of you that signed up and are spending an hour or so with us today to talk about the housing market. I'm looking forward to the interactive session as well at the end, where we can bounce around some of these ideas a little bit more. I want to start off and just to sort of preface it, every year at least once, TRREB undertakes consumer polling pointed at the housing market. And a lot of that is looking at buyer intentions. So asking people, are you planning on purchasing a home over the next year? And if so, where are you going to buy? How much are you going to spend, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, not everyone that you poll is planning on purchasing a home. In fact, the great majority of people that you poll, in fact, are not planning on purchasing a home for a variety of reasons. But, if you think about the last couple of years, and certainly as we move through the end of 2023 and into 2024, the reasons for not purchasing a home, were by and large associated with affordability. So people just, outright are saying, I can't afford it, so I'm not purchasing a home, or it's too expensive, interest rates, mortgage rates are too high, and I'm sitting on the sidelines. And that's certainly what we've seen a lot of over the past couple of years since the spring of 2022, when the Bank of Canada started raising its policy rate, the target for the overnight rate. That impacted people very quickly. And it's not like there's no intention to purchase homes. As Shaun noted, we've seen strong population growth, and we'll talk more about that in the GTA context over the next few minutes. It's the fact that they're going to need to see their affordability situation improve over the next couple of years, and we'll gradually start to see people moving off the sidelines and back into the market. And the affordability impact also comes through when Ipsos is asking Canadians, well, what's top of mind? What are the issues that are top of mind for Canadians across the country, and certainly including the Greater Toronto area? Number one, Shaun Simpson from Ipsos, and many of you have seen him present at our event, says that healthcare is always top, right? So when you ask Canadians what they're most concerned with, healthcare is always top of the list. But over the last couple of years, housing has become a very, very, very close second. And really, if you look at the top 2, 3, 4 issues underneath healthcare, they're all related, right? Because housing and the demand or lack thereof for ownership housing is related to inflation. It's related to the Bank of Canada's decision around borrowing costs. It's related to the overall economy in terms of people's confidence in their ability to gain and retain employment and see their wages and salaries go up on a year-over-year basis, because all that's required to purchase a home and carry that mortgage over the long term. And so that's sort of a backdrop or a lens through which we can look at the housing market, certainly looking back over the last couple of years, but also looking forward through the end of 2024 and through 2025 as well. But just as a bit of an aside, I won't spend too much time on it, But there is also a link or relationship between housing and housing affordability and people's overall well-being. And so when we think about, healthcare being top of mind for Canadians, and certainly people living in the GTA and broader Greater Golden Horseshoe, there is that linkage. And, every year when we release our market year in review and outlook, we do a specialist study that's related to housing, but a little bit removed from, the standard look at housing market statistics and polling results. And this past year we had CREA undertake some research on, sort of social well-being and overall well-being as it relates to housing affordability. And what we found is that, those people that are really facing an affordability crunch, whether we're talking about ownership housing or rental housing, their overall well-being scored below, those that were in a more affordable situation. You can put a dollar value on that, because when you think about people's well-being, their productivity, their need for healthcare and what have you, that has a negative economic impact, and it can be in the tens of billions of dollars in a large metropolitan area like the GTA. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm not going to really spend any more time on this sort of aspect of the market, but I encourage you to go to TRREB.ca and you can download our market year in review and outlook report. You can also download the actual CREA report that looks at this, sort of broader linkage between housing affordability or lack thereof and people's overall well-being. So thinking about the economy more generally, and I thought Shaun did a really good job sort of setting up that relationship between population growth and what we're seeing in terms of the labor market and overall economic growth in Canada. And certainly that drills down to the GTA and broader Greater Golden Horseshoe as well. Because certainly, since we started to see the Bank of Canada hike borrowing costs, over that same period of time, we have started to see an uptick in the unemployment rate in the Greater Toronto Area. And Shaun's right, to a certain degree, what we've seen in the economy has also been impacted by, very strong population growth. And so when we look at this unemployment rate trending upwards, on one hand, we could say, wow, so we've seen, an upward trend in borrowing costs. That's caused the economy to slow down, and it's affected the labor market to a certain degree. And to an extent, that's true, but it's also important to remember, the unemployment rate's an equation, a ratio, right? And so the denominator in that ratio is just the size of the labor force, the overall number of people looking for jobs. And so when you see the unemployment rate trending up, it's also important to remember that population growth has trended up really strongly over the past couple of years as well. And so we've gone from a scenario where, immigration in Ontario on a quarterly basis used to range between 20 and 40,000 people. We've jumped up now over the last 2 to 3 years where that range has been more in the 40 to 60,000 range. So it gets back to the hockey stick chart that Shaun was showing us for Canada as a whole. And obviously that drills down into Ontario. It drills down further into the Greater Toronto Area, because if you think about the overall demand for housing and how that gets impacted by population growth, the GTA and surrounding Greater Golden Horseshoe are the single greatest beneficiaries of immigration into Canada, sort of drilling down into the metropolitan area. People want to move here from all around the world to take advantage of the diverse employment opportunities and just the overall virtuous circle we've seen over the last 2 decades in terms of overall population diversity as well. And so we're lucky, we're attracting people from all around the world, but at the same time, we need to see more on the affordability front to continue to attract these people over time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But sort of through that lens then, I want to sort of drill down and talk about the ownership market first. If we think about the overall demand for housing in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and that's what I'm going to show for the rest of these slides, is looking at the Greater Golden Horseshoe more generally. And so in 2021, the last full year before the Bank of Canada started increasing borrowing costs, we saw over 150,000 transactions through TRREB's MLS system for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And I just want to take a bit of a step back. I don't have a slide to show this, so you have to take my word for it. But if you think about, coming out of the recession in say 2010 and 2011, we're talking about say 85, 90% of transactions through the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board's MLS system were within the GTA proper, sort of what would be considered sort of the traditional or historic market area covered off by TRREB and its members. What we've seen over the last decade or so is a real increase in the share of transactions undertaken outside of the GTA proper, and so the rest of that greater Golden Horseshoe area. So 905, 705, 519 area codes in those surrounding smaller metropolitan areas. And so now it's about a third of the transactions that go through TRREB's MLS system is in that surrounding area. And again, that speaks to the affordability issue that's built up over time. As we've seen, a market with relatively short supply between, say, 2010 and the end of 2021, we're seeing a steady upward pressure on home prices, and obviously that got magnified even further as we went through COVID and ultra low borrowing costs. And so people started looking further afield, and members of TRREB obviously were helping those people find those properties in centers outside of the traditional GTA. And so when you look at that 156,000, the participation of TRREB members within that number of sales has really grown over the past number of years. So where are we at, in the first, as we're at the sort of the first half of 2024 compared to where we were last year? And it looks like, we've reached a bit of a bottoming out in terms of home sales. A very similar number of sales through the first 5 months of 2024 compared to what we saw last year. Now, I will point out that we've seen a little bit more activity again in those surrounding GGH areas versus the GTA. And again, I think that just relates to the relative affordability that you see in some of these centers. And so some of the surrounding areas in Simcoe County, in Durham, and even further afield into the 705 have actually seen better performing sales results than what we see in the traditional GTA proper. And so, that's sort of the home sale story, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, as borrowing costs increased, that started to obviously impact people's affordability calculations, and a lot of people had to move to the sidelines because, quite simply, the mortgage payments associated with purchasing a home in a lot of parts of the greater Golden Horseshoe, it just didn't make sense. And so again, it's not that these people don't want to purchase a home at some point in the future. It's just that they can't right now, or they can't get into the type of home they need for their current situation with where borrowing costs are. Now, to a certain degree, we have seen home prices decline. And that's mitigated the impact of borrowing costs to a certain degree, but not entirely. And so if you look at all home sales in the greater Golden Horseshoe, obviously we saw a decline in the average selling price between 2022 and as we move through 2023, and we've seen sort of more or less a flat line. In some months on a year-over-year basis, the price has held pretty much firm, maybe up a little bit, and in some months it's been down a little bit. So sort of flatlining. Obviously, we're setting ourselves up for tighter market conditions in the future. Shaun talked about it from the perspective of, or the Canadian perspective. I'll talk about it in a few slides, from the greater Golden Horseshoe in particular. Where we've seen even more price mitigation, and given that we're talking about the greater Golden Horseshoe and that verges into cottage country, lakefront properties, and what have you, a little bit more than what we see in the GTA. I just put on an extra line here looking at waterfront properties, and obviously we saw a real boom in cottage properties during the initial years of the pandemic. Makes a lot of sense. People could work pretty much from wherever they wanted to, or a lot of the population, and so you did see a real increase in cottage property sales. We know the story that's ebbed to a certain degree. There's more choice in the waterfront and cottage market now than there was, say, 2 and 3 years ago. And so we have started to see, average selling prices for waterfront homes, also be negotiated downwards with more choice in the marketplace. And that downward trend's a little bit steeper than looking at the overall market as a whole. And obviously interest rates impact that a lot as well. Certainly for people looking at their primary residence, whether they're looking to purchase or they're thinking ahead to mortgage rate renewal, that obviously impacts the market even more so when you're talking about people's choice as to whether or not they're going to purchase or hold on to a secondary property like a waterfront cottage. And so how does this turn around? How do we see sales that were at the 65,000, 70,000 level last year How do we get back to, over 100,000, 110,000, which would make more sense in terms of the level of population and historic, per capita home sales? Well, one of the sources of growth and demand for ownership housing over time is, of course, first-time buyers. And not surprisingly, between the fall of 2022 and the fall of 2023, when Ipsos was surveying first-time buyers, we've seen those intentions decline. Obviously, first-time buyers, people moving from living in their parents' home directly into home ownership, or moving from rental accommodation into home ownership for the first time, they're very interest rate sensitive. They haven't built up any equity in an existing owned home, and so it's basically savings, and they have to account for, in a lot of cases, a higher share of that purchase being accounted for by a mortgage. And so, obviously, we want to see the first-time buyer moving back in the market to see overall sales increase. But an interesting stat, because of the strong levels of population growth that we've seen over the past number of years on the back of immigration, it's been important to sort of look at that cohort of the population separately from the overall GTA average. And so when Ipsos has been looking at existing homeowners and intending buyers, we do try to sort of bifurcate or break out what the trends are for relatively new Canadians. And one thing we find is that while a lot of immigrant households that initially move to Canada, initially move to the GTA or GGH, choose to rent, they actually move into the ownership market a lot quicker than sort of the average GTA household, and certainly people that have been here for multiple generations. And so that notion of purchasing a home, of making that bricks and mortar investment, which isn't necessarily available to people that coming from other countries around the world, that's very attractive. And so if you think about, and Shaun's hockey stick analogy, if you think about the strong growth in population that we've seen in the GGH on the back of immigration, obviously that bodes well medium to long term for an increase in the demand for ownership housing. But at the same time, a lot of these first-time home buyers to move into the market are going to need to see more relief than a 25 basis point cut on the part of the Bank of Canada. And so asking people, well, look at it, you're sitting on the sidelines right now. By and large, you likely want to purchase a home at some point in the future, but what kind of relief are you going to need to see to move out of your current rental accommodation and into the ownership market? And we see, really, they're saying 1 percentage point to start that movement, but really we need to see, 2 percentage points or 200 basis points to start seeing that en masse movement of first-time buyers into the market. And so, as we move through this year and towards the end of 2025, that's when we're getting to that 200, 250 basis points sort of movement in borrowing costs that will really see people move back into the marketplace. And so, yes, do we expect to see, an increase in the demand for ownership housing as we move through the second half of this year? Certainly. I mean, some of it's psychological, some of it certainly is financial in terms of the household balance sheet, but even more so as we move through 2025 is I think where we're really going to start to pick up momentum in terms of home sales. And this chart just kind of lays that out in a slightly different way. And so, taking the average price home in the Greater Golden Horseshoe at the end of May, and assuming a 20% down payment and a 5-year variable rate mortgage, 25-year amortization, sort of a pretty standard scenario, we could see, as that variable rate mortgage trends lower in terms of the borrowing cost, the impact. And so it makes a lot of sense that 25, 50 basis points is not making a huge difference on that monthly payment and overall savings on a year-to-year basis. But when you get to 100 basis points off, 200 basis points off, now you're starting to talk about thousands of dollars a year in savings that could be then dedicated to other important household purchases that right now people aren't willing to forego and pay a mortgage associated with higher borrowing costs. And so I think this chart helps us understand people's point of view of where we need to see borrowing costs go before they move off the sidelines and back into the marketplace. Now, obviously the concern though is that as we start to see more and more people entertain the purchase of a home, are we going to start to see in pretty short order stronger upward pressure on home prices and get back into that vicious circle? Because if interest rates go down and prices go up, there's a certain degree of offset. And so are we going to see any kind of long-term benefits in terms of affordability as interest rates trend lower? Well, at least initially, the one sort of safety valve as we start to see more demand for housing over the next couple of years is the fact that we have seen inventory levels built up, and Shaun touched on it from a months of inventory perspective. I'm just looking at it here from just sort of a pure new listings perspective, and we can see that while listings dropped off in 2023, we've seen them pick up, quite markedly as we move through 2024. 97,000 through the end of May in the GGH this year versus 81,000 last year. That's a pretty substantial change, and so it means that as we start to see buying activity, as we start to see the number of sales pick up over the next year, there's still going to be room for negotiation, and so not as much upward pressure on pricing. And so if you look at that sales to new listings ratio here, we see it's very low. I mean, it was trending lower between 2022 and 2023, and it's even trended lower still as we move through 2024. And that's the key reason why we saw the average housing price dip lower, and now it's sort of flatline, because quite simply, if you're active in the market today looking for a home in a lot of neighborhoods throughout the greater Golden Horseshoe, you have a lot of negotiating power, or certainly more negotiating power than you did in 2020, 2021, and the first quarter of 2022. And so again, certainly we're going to see market conditions tighten up. But there is a certain amount of inventory that we're going to have to eat through before we start to see any meaningful upward pressure on average home prices. And that gets us to the rental market, because one of the questions we ask renters in the polling that we do is, how much would your rent have to increase before you seriously considered the purchase of a home? And a huge percentage of renters today in the Greater Toronto area say, you know what? Even a $1 increase, even in this higher interest rate environment, even a $1 increase in my rent would prompt me to start looking for at ownership housing, because not only has rent grown over the last couple of years by and large, but people also look at the housing investment from the equity side. So you're paying down a mortgage, you're building up equity over time, and so people are more willing to entertain that purchase vis-a-vis renting, even if that mortgage payment is slightly higher, especially in this high interest or a high rent environment. And it's interesting though, because while we were talking about double-digit and high single-digit increases in average rent over the last couple of years, things have changed to a certain degree in 2024. We've seen more supply in the rental market, whereas the growth in rental transactions, while still positive, has ebbed to a certain degree. And so what that means is a lot of renters today versus last year, and even more importantly 2 years ago, do have more choice in the rental market as well. And we've actually seen a flatlining, even a bit of a dip over the last couple of quarters in average rent. And so while this time last year, if we were thinking about the rental market and people moving into home ownership, that's perhaps less top of mind for some renter households today, because there has been some relief. And so again, there's a lot of people sitting on the sidelines that have every intention on moving back into the home ownership market, but we're going to need to see a little bit more relief, I think, on the borrowing cost front before that starts en masse. And this just shows sort of that impact on the actual rent level over the last year or so. We'd reached obviously a record level in 2023, but that's come off a little bit, so provide a little bit more relief on the rent front, and maybe not prompting as many people to take as hard of a look at the ownership market compared to, say, the end of last year. And so, that's the housing market, overview and a bit of an outlook from my perspective. And I'll turn it back over to Chris now to bring us to the discussion part of the event. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Jason. And if I could call Shaun back on the screen, that'd be great. So we're getting to our Q&A session here. It's always great to see the questions come in from everyone. The first one, and it actually ties into a bit of a personal story for me. So we heard Nicole speak earlier about how people are having to look outside of the GTA and the Greater Golden Horseshoe in Ontario. My daughter, who's in her mid-20s, recently made a decision, her and her partner, to move up to Huntsville. They've got a big down payment. They got hardly any debt. They're both working full time, but anything in their price range here still needs $150,000 to $200,000 worth of work. So what, you know, both of them lived their entire life here, worked here, have taken jobs up north at a lower pay, but they're you know, have more buying ability because home ownership is really important to them. Are you seeing? Do you have any comments? Are we seeing our Canadian younger generation? Are they starting to move outside, or are they sitting tight, waiting for maybe interest rates to come down? So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Start with Jason.
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to my comment just in terms of the geography, you know, of our memberships, you know, business over the last decade. I mean, you know, we've seen more and more people looking further afield outside of that traditional GTA market area, and I think, you know, the flexibility that came about, you know, during and after the pandemic with people's ability to work further afield. You know, I think that's still top of mind for a lot of people, and so, you know. We have an affordability issue, whether you're talking about the GTA or the surrounding Greater Golden Horseshoe, but your dollar does go farther, you know, as you get into that 705 and 519 area code. And so, you know, I think it's that notion is more top of mind for a lot of households today than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago. But we were already starting to see that trend, you know, even prior to the real run up in prices, you know, during and even a little bit after the pandemic. Any additional thoughts, Shaun?
Sure. Well, I think Jason and I have talked about this for years, right? Like that the out and up to be able to afford something has been going on, definitely in the GTA and GGH, you know, for 15 years or, you know, thereabouts. During COVID, what we've really seen, and I don't know that it was a COVID, like so many things during COVID, you could blame it on COVID, or maybe it was just turbocharged by COVID. But what we saw was Ontario got filled up. Like you went as far as you could. London, Ottawa, like, you know, like North Bay kind of blew up during COVID. But what also blew up was people from Ontario moving to interior BC. And that market went from a $400,000 market to an $800,000 market. Now Calgary is blowing up. And give it a couple of years, that'll be a $900,000 market. It's $400,000 a year ago. You know, Edmonton, Saskatoon, everywhere where you can still afford a single detached home, and whether you take your job with you and work remotely, or you leave it behind and take a new job, to your point, Chris, that you can, you know, it's the differential between the income you're earning and the down payment you're coming with and the price of a place. You know, like people don't want to, the reality is people don't want to rent for the rest of their lives. They still want to become homeowners, and they're willing to move all over the country to do it. The craziest one is the interprovincial migration by age, which only comes out once a year from SACAN. Where are the millennials going? From Ontario to Alberta. You know what? There's a weird bimodal distribution where, you know who else is going to Alberta? The 65 plus. And I think that's the grandparents following their kids to be near the grandkids and their kids who are now moved across the country. And then the other funny one, obviously, is the older Gen Xers, the 60-year-olds who were called back to commute into Toronto every day, into the office, and they were like, bye, and they moved out to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and they're retired now. So lots of movement around the country. But yeah, to circle back to the original question, like, yeah, people are willing to go where they can sort of, I hate to use this term because it's not, I don't want it to be my term, but if you went out and asked 100 people on the street, tell me what the Canadian dream is, I bet home ownership would be a feature prominently in there, and people are willing to go where it takes to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that the parents are following the kids, because my daughter's putting a hard sell on, oh, you got to move up here, it's great. So anyway, she's got us thinking.
It's a thing.
Now, along the same lines, we talked about our Canadian population, but let's talk about the new immigrants now. Where do you see the majority of them going to purchase homes? Start with you, Shaun, from a Canadian perspective.
Sure. Well, the way that international immigration typically works in Canada is that it is like sort of, it's not like you don't get to go wherever you want. You You know, it's very spread out across the country very evenly. So you'll see that when you look at the international immigration numbers to every province, they're sort of very proportional to the size of that province. And then you sort of stay there for a bit, and then everybody goes to Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. That's basically how it works. So I would suspect that that would be rental demand in those initial places, and then ownership housing demand in the big cities. That's a more permanent sort of where you ultimately want to end up.
Yeah, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen it. I mean, I mentioned at the end of my presentation that we've seen a bit of relief in the rental market, but I think that's in quotes to a certain degree, because I mean, rents are still high, and we're still seeing strong single-digit growth in in the number of rental transactions. And so by and large, people move to the larger centers to take advantage of employment opportunities, to take advantage of social networks that have built up over time for people from different parts of the world. But once they get established, they get work. They're able to sort of establish a skill set that would allow them to move to different parts of the country. And I think that's when you start to see that intra-regional, so people moving out of the city of Toronto into the GTA, into the GGH and beyond, or the interprovincial, where people even look to move further afield. But if you look at a region like the Greater Toronto Area, that's always been more than offset by newcomers to Canada choosing to settle in the GTA or GGH. And I guess the final point I'll put on that is the concern is, when we're thinking about housing affordability, just overall, whether you're talking about rental or ownership, is do we reach a tipping point where, despite all of the benefits, social and otherwise, economic, moving to the GTA, does it get outweighed by the lack of housing affordability, and do people start to look elsewhere? And the problem for Canada as a whole is if people don't think they can make a go of it in places like Toronto and Vancouver, they may start looking elsewhere entirely. Not elsewhere in Canada, but elsewhere, around the world, to look for that affordable situation. And that's why, when you get back to a housing policy standpoint, why it's so important to see, more supply coming along to keep up, with that population growth over time.
Yeah. Great. Got another question. So moving towards interest rates and the cost of living increase. So I think many of us were caught off guard with a bit of a bump in the cost of living this month. And the question is, we recently had a rate increase. One would think, a rate decrease. One would think when rates go down, cost of living should come down a little bit, assuming the market price hasn't gone up drastically. Maybe the rate, it's not incorporated into this, but Jason, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't put it in this presentation, but a slide I've been using quite a bit lately is looking at inflation, and then inflation adjusted for borrowing costs. And so, if you back out the impact of higher borrowing costs over the last couple of years, you've actually seen inflation more or less running at the Bank of Canada's target. And so I think that was also, it gave them cover to a certain degree to start thinking about lowering borrowing costs as well, because it was a major component of inflation over the last year. So certainly, as you dial back the cost of borrowing, it's going to have an impact. But at the same time, that positive impact of lower borrowing costs compounds as rates start to trend lower. And so that slide I showed, someone taking on a variable rate mortgage to buy the average price home in the GTH. One move isn't necessarily enough to push a lot of people back into the market, but the benefit compounds over time. So when we went to 100 basis points and 200 basis points, that is a pretty big impact. You're starting to talk about hundreds or even thousands of dollars a month.
Yeah, Shaun, any additional insights?
Sure. Well, I don't like to speculate too much, but on the interest rate piece, if you think about Canadian economy, how weak it is, think about the willingness of the Canadian Central Bank to diverge from the US Fed. There is some leeway there. That there's a lot of reasons for rates to maybe go down faster than people think, like sort of 25 basis points at almost every meeting going into next summer. So and I think that like it will be a staggered re-entry into the market of that massive amount of people that are on the sidelines. There's going to be some of them that come off the sidelines in the summer and into the fall based on these first rate cuts. As soon as if people start to get a pace of it, like right now, like inflation came in stronger just 2 days ago, and expectations have moved off again to only 2 more cuts this year. I don't think that's going to last. I think it will be probably 3. And if they keep that pace up, if they do every meeting in the first half of next year, then we're down 200 basis points by next summer. That's a totally realistic scenario, especially if the US starts going down too. Yeah, I think that the whole borrowing cost, it's been the dominant feature of this market for 3 years now, and it will continue to be. But it's going to be beneficial now that like people that want to get into the market will finally be able to. All the people that have been waiting. I think that their time has come. Now, to your point of offsetting, to what extent is our prices going to go up and offset that affordability? I think that Ontario is probably best positioned of anywhere in Canada to sort of have that buffer period where there is more inventory and there's a lot of scope for sales to go up before we get back into that situation where if you're a realtor and you're representing a buyer, the odds are you're going up against 10 other buyers, you're going to walk away empty-handed and your client's pissed off and there's one sale, even though you got 10 people who want to buy a home. In Ontario, you could get 10 people that suddenly want to buy a home and get 10 home sales for now.
Yeah, great question. We got a question from my good friend, the past president of CREA, Larry Chirkwa. He wants to know if you have any thoughts about the capital gain tax. I guess it's June 25 date. Shaun, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I only had 15 minutes today, so I cut this slide out, but I did have this in there as a interest piece because I thought people might be interested. So what we're really talking about with the capital gains inclusion rate increase is an announcement window, right? It was announced in the budget on April 16th. It was basically came into effect 2 days ago. So you had that amount of time. If you're selling stock, you call your broker, you're like, dump it. And you can do that. But in the real estate space, 2 months is not really a very long announcement window. So what's difficult for us with looking at data is, okay, are people dumping family cottages? First of all, those tend to be like sort of heirlooms. You pass them down, it costs what it costs to pass it down. So there's probably not going to be a lot of that. But even then, they're often listed as single family homes. So it's very difficult to sort of carve that out. In the condo space, like there's a lot of those on the market already. So to carve out any additional investor condos that have gone on the market, I'm sure there was some in that window, and to be able to also identify those and then which ones sold is hard. But the one investigation that we did do that was very successful at identifying this trend, and I'm not going to share my screen right now, so I'll just tell you about it, was multifamily units. We know those are investor held. Like twoplex, triplex, fourplex kind of things. The day after the budget, we do daily tracking through the roof, 50% increase for like 3 weeks straight of never before seen listings. Sales, crickets. So what the impact was yeah, a lot of people tried to dump these things and it didn't work out. And probably in the last couple of days, they've been pulled off the market.
Interesting. Any additional insight, Jason?
No, I mean, I think it's, and to Shaun's point, I mean, we're seeing an increase in listings in some segments of the market anyway in the GTA over the last couple of years, and so only a couple months in, it'll be interesting to see, but it's a little bit hard to sort of eke out those listings that are 100% associated with the potential capital gains hike. But it's an interesting point that Shaun makes, and certainly when people are faced with seeing their potential gains from an investment reduced, it does change behavior.
All right, we got time for one more question. It might be twofold. So first is any insights on pre-construction and new construction in the marketplace? And the second part to it is there any resale versus new home sales differences that you're seeing right now? So, starting with you, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the GTA, and it's been well documented, I mean, certainly we haven't seen the type of sales center activity, we've seen, say, 5 years ago, or even less. And a lot of that does have to do with the amount of choice that you're seeing in the resale market right now, right? Like if you're faced with, as a buyer, and you're benefiting from a lot of choice out there in the marketplace, why would you go and visit a sales center, buy a home off of plans for delivery at some point down the road? So there's a pretty strong, I talked about the sales to new listing ratio. You can talk about months of inventory or whatever metric you want to use, but there's a pretty strong correlation over time between how tight the resale market is versus people's decision then to move into the new home space, because if you'll sacrifice some time to take delivery of that home to perhaps make it a little bit easier to get that purchase done when you're competing with a lot of other buyers. There's also a correlation if you think about the condo space with how tight the rental market is, especially when you're talking about available units coming online. You have investors that are looking at the rental market and feel that it's pretty healthy, and so that can drive it as well. Albeit over the last few years, with the rising price of condos generally, it's been a tougher nut to crack on the investment side, just from a return perspective.
Great, Shaun.
Sure, I'll take a little bit of a different tack on that one and say, look, a lot of the data that we're seeing up till right now, we did our May data release last Monday, and my quote in it, and hey, Larry, if you're out there, this would have been your quote if we were back a couple months when you were our chair, was, hey man, here's the May data, but it might as well be ancient history because we're entering a new phase. Rates are going down now. That's going to benefit builders. It's going to benefit buyers. It's going to bring demand back. So all of the weakness that we've seen up until right now, you can sort of say like, yeah, that sucked. It was a tough couple of years, but we're now going to move back into a more busy phase. Hopefully sort of a vibrant, busy phase. Like I say, in Ontario, it's likely to be more vibrant. If you're in Calgary, you're going to get to experience the Ontario 2021 experience of 20 offers on a place. But it's certainly likely to spur a lot more new construction than we've seen in the last couple of years, I think. And it's it's not only it's demand for their product, and it's lower rates because they borrow money too.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Jason and Shaun, for attending our 4th annual event. Maybe next year we can try to do something in person, and our AV team proved that they can do it. So, but thank you both. Some great presentations, and I know there was a question for me, and yes, the recording will be shared with all the attendees. So I'm going to wrap it up with just a quick recap today, but thank you for joining. And now I got to learn how to share my screen. All right, so just a recap to what Nicole said. So right now our values are based on a 2016 market value, and we are waiting on a date for the next reassessment. We don't know what it is. It won't be this year. But you get this question a lot. When there is a reassessment takes place, we just saw the numbers from Jason and Shaun. The market's gone up drastically since 2016. And it's the only time in your life you want to be average or below average. So if the market has doubled since 2016 and you're gone up the average, you're likely not going to see a change. If you're in a neighborhood that maybe has decreased due to some other factors, more than likely you're going to see a decrease in taxes. And if you're in a hotter neighborhood that's seen a more than average increase, the good news is, you've got more money in the equity of your home. The downside is you're going to pay a little bit more taxes. So just keep that in mind. I know you're going to get this question a lot, and just this is an important message you can share with your clients. Secondly, we talked a little bit about our realtor resources. So again, our relationship with Ontario Realtors is very important to MPAC for 2 reasons. One is, you all have access to our data. The second is you're often the front line relaying how assessment works in Ontario. So as Nicole said, we created a new Realtor Hub, which has a lot of information. We also have a first-time homeowners hub, so you probably have a lot more questions from first-time home buyers versus someone who's reselling a home who's been paying taxes for a while. And then we've got our training for realtors. So we've got about 5 or 6 webinars that our team puts on. We've got an assessment 101 for some of the new realtors who want to learn about assessments, information. We've got a whole commercial industrial webinar dedicated for commercial realtors, an ABM webinar for those who are interested in learning more about that, and a webinar that dives deep into the factors that affect value and what goes into our assessed values. So we're going to share the links to this with everyone who registered and attended to this. So please check it out. Now, this is very important. You're going to thank me for this. So in property line, make sure you're buying bundles, okay, for the res detail report or AVM reports. Number one, it's going to save you time. You're not going to have to put your credit card in every time. You're going to put it in once. Number two, when it comes tax time, rather than going through and trying to compile all your orders through the year, you're going to have one receipt for your bundle. They won't expire. Once you run out, you can buy another bundle. And again, it's saving you time and money. So I know there's a lot of questions about how you're going to get your free AVM code. So we're going to send you a link to the survey. You have to complete the survey to get the code. And again, they didn't tell it to me because they knew I would tell everyone on the call. So we really appreciate your feedback. We thank you for joining us. We hope you fill out the survey and give us some feedback how we can adjust this next year. Another successful event. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today. It was very good, and thank the team for all the AV work and all the work behind the scenes in putting this together. So with that, I'm going to end the presentation and look forward to seeing everyone in person soon.